Thank you for attending this very interesting and useful, meaningful session this morning. As you can see, we have great speakers who have many years of experiences, knowledges, and most of our wisdoms built up in their minds. And the topic for this session, which is the first plenary session, basically, which is designed to set the framework of the whole event, is what we call the laws of success or secrets of success. How do we succeed? Because HR really exists for success. It's not for, it doesn't exist for anything else. So we would like to see how these leaders, proven leaders on the global scene, are defining the success, how they see the secrets and approaches which are suitable or which are required for successful venture or leadership. So we have great experts in that area. So what I'll do is, the way we will conduct this session will be, for each speaker, we have 20 minutes, roughly 20 minutes to speak on their respective topics. And there will be a short 1 or 2 minute comments, if there are any, from the speakers to whatever the speaker has said. And then at the end, during the session, you will be given a chance to hand out a question that you can write on, and which will be handed to me, and I will convey them so that they can answer to these respective questions. So let's see how these leaders see the success as a goal of all the HR activities. The first speaker will be Youngsuk. He's actually, I'm speaking so proudly, he's a Korean. He was born outside of Korea, but he actually spent a few years in Korea in his childhood. And he has a very interesting and almost as famous in his respective area as Dr. Kim Young, who spoke this morning. He's very active on the global scene. Chairman Ji, who is the chairman of Elsevier, which is a global company based in Amsterdam, and this is a world publishing concern established in 1880. Some 240 years ago, and the sales of the turnover, sales of this Elsevier is some 7 billion euros. You can see how big the number is. And he is a chairman and CEO of this great company, and which is operating in 24 countries, have about 7,000 employees. And notably, Mr. Ji is also president of International Publishing Association, which is the congregation of all the publishers around the globe, which is another very meaningful position that he has. We are all very proud of these Koreans being active around the globe. Let's give him a big applause for his speech.
Thank you, Dr. Junn. These introductions are always making you look better than you actually are. I also want to thank the Global HR Forum for having me here today to participate in this session. It's a real privilege for me to share my views about leadership. And today I'll try to address some major challenges that I see in our current business landscape and how we can perhaps prepare future leaders to deal with them a little better. I'm particularly happy that this occasion brought me back to my home country. While here, I hope I can watch this movie called The Admiral, Roaring Currents, or Myeongnyang, which was released this summer and has now become the single most popular film of all times in Korea. The film documents the famous Battle of Myeongnyang, the most celebrated triumph of Admiral Lee Sunshin, who is Korea's obviously greatest naval commander. Growing up, I was always fascinated by this hero who rose to the rank of admiral with very little formal training and who was undefeated in his clashes with the enemies. As you may know, Lee Sun-shin's achievements and military innovations during the Imjin War of the late 16th century were fundamental to the shaping of Korean history. For example, at the Battle of Hansando in 1592, one of the largest in the world history ever, Admiral Lee unveiled a creative crane wing formation to surround and destroy over 47 enemy ships without losing a single vessel himself. An ingenious tactic that secured a much-needed victory. Later in that year, the steel chains he decided to place across the Myeongnyang Strait proved vital in entangling and trapping the enemy ships. That allowed Admiral Lee to hold off over a fleet of hundreds of enemy ships with only 13 Korean vessels. And his revival of Gobuksun, or turtle ships, with their heavy artillery, formidable defenses, and intimidating dragon head fixture were critical in expelling the enemies, particularly in the war's final days at Noryang. But what most people don't know about this great man is that another great man was integral to his success. As a child in Seoul, Lee Sun-shin befriended Yoo Sung-yong, a scholarly man who was so precocious. It's said that by the age of 8, he had already learned all the teachings of Confucius. And later, he held many prominent government positions and even became prime minister during the War of Imjin. He frequently offered Lee Sun-shin guidance during personal hardships, and his support would prove critical in guiding the admiral's career path and pushing him through the Navy ranks. When Admiral Lee faced criticism and persecution from superior commanders, Yoo Sung-yong used his own influence to save his friends from disgrace and prepare him for the new challenges. In today's complex business landscape, I'm sure many of us here wish we had the support of a well-respected, wise man like Yoo Sung-yong to guide us through this time of turbulent change. Globalization and heightened competition have drastically altered the playing field for all companies and all organizations. With advances in technology, information is more readily accessible than ever before across a wider range of people. This empowers both your partners and competitors to dig deeper for valuable business insights and improve their operations. Meanwhile, consumer expectations are constantly evolving in different directions across the world. And from a macro perspective, emerging countries are increasingly contending with the advanced economies. This expanding scale and complexity pose a wide range of challenges for us as business leaders. Both the workforce that they have to integrate and customers we must serve are incredibly diverse. Leaders now have to manage teams of 20+ nationalities and run companies that operate in many different languages. In addition, they need to be sensitive to differences in gender, politics, religion, etc. At the same time, companies must prepare to partner with clients across dozens of countries with varying degrees of preparedness. So as business leaders, it's our responsibility to integrate this immense diversity in a way that will foster a trusting as well as successful environment. And in today's hyper-competitive global markets, the sheer volume and variety of details one needs to keep track kind of makes you feel like putting together a puzzle. Among these elements, 4 environments stand out that encompass all of these small challenges. as business leaders, we work to address the questions the future will bring. First is global environment. Today, leaders are expected to operate across multiple regions as seamlessly as possible, balancing long-term business goals with attention to the smallest cultural protocols in every negotiation in every country. At the same time, they need to invest in common skills among diverse team members to be able to leverage the global nature of the markets. The second is collaborative environment. They're expected to use this heightened global awareness to orchestrate a collaborative partnerships and shared expertise. The third is a trusting environment. Collaborating effectively in this way requires leaders to foster a trusting environment. It's important to have a deep mutual trust with colleagues and partners to execute a shared vision. And finally, a changing environment. Taking those risks is more important than ever given our constantly changing environment. And after all, risk is inherent to innovation, and leadership requires having ambition and courage to pursue the progress. So, if learning to operate in these four environments is crucial to addressing the challenges, the question then is, how do we teach that to our future leaders? Now, traditionally, we consider things like great liberal arts education, meaningful MBA program perhaps, or lifelong training courses that are given by our companies and other institutions. And I am actually proud to be a product of all three. But I don't think that's enough. While all these three play critical educational roles, in my opinion, the most effective way to prepare aspiring leaders for them to thrive in tomorrow's business landscape is through dedicated and long-term mentorship. Dedicated and long-term mentorship. In a world where there's far more mobility between jobs and far more diversity in terms of skill sets and expectations, the integration of personalized mentoring opportunity at all levels, from high school to the 20-year-plus career, is crucial. Just as Yu Sung-ryong guided Lee Sun-shin through the ups and downs of his career, those with experience like us, we need to be generous in investing our time and guide the young people. In many ways, the value of mentorship seems to be prevalent everywhere. Look, just go into Amazon.com and put in the word mentoring, and you're going to get 11,000 recommendations. They're going to be anything from coaching for dummies or coaching and mentoring for dummies to starting strong or mentoring fable by experts. Clearly, there is a large consumer base hungry to learn more about growing their personal relationships. Moreover, today's scholarly community continues to uncover new perspectives on mentorship, showing that companies and executives do recognize the importance. According to the American Society of Training and Development, ASTD, 71% of Fortune 500 companies design organizational mentoring programs. ASTD also says that a survey of those companies and others based in the US found that over three-quarters of them point to mentoring as playing a key role in their careers. And empirical evidence suggests that actually mentoring pays a quantifiable dividends. For example, one very well-known study examined the effects of a mentorship program over 1,000 employees over 5 years at a famous California-based company. I can't tell you the name of the company. The mentees in the program saw more frequent promotions, higher retention rates, and greater number of salary increases than those who were not mentored. At the same time, those who mentored got the same benefits compared to those who did not mentor young people. There are quantifiable benefits. However, when you examine this much more closely, we are seeing signs that mentoring may not be as prevalent as it should be. Today, more than ever, young people are changing companies, even industries, every few years. About a month ago, I participated in a global online conversation hosted by Boston University's School of Management, and it was called Business Education Jam, a new type of online discussion focused on business education. As a part of the VIP expert during the jam, I posed some discussion questions on an online forum with a wide range of participants, including MBAs, academics, seasoned professionals, and so on. While a few of the questions I threw in there got lots and lots of participating conversation, I threw out there one question on mentoring, and I got 2 comments. What does that say about our true commitment to mentoring, our true level of experience on mentoring? For Admiral Jin Sunshin, his mentoring relationship with Youngsuk was a primary catalyst for his success. We all know Admiral E for his great accomplishments, but we also know that he experienced a great deal of challenges. In fact, he failed to become an officer until he was age 32 because in his first examination, he fell off a horse. And then he finally got into the Army, not Navy. Then when he got up to the northeastern part for his duty, his fellows disliked him and kicked him out. And in fact, he put him in jail. But Youngsuk saw a talent in him, gave him a book that he wrote called 중선 전수 방략, Defensive Strategy of Increasing Loss to the Enemy, and put him in a Navy and ignited his career in the Navy. Similarly, those who navigate today's diverse and constantly changing business landscape, especially from a human resource perspective, should be supported by unstructured and structured mentoring. This is how aspiring leaders will learn the intangibles that are so important in today's world, like trust, like integration, like global outlook. So let's narrow down on trust. Questions like, how to trust business partners' judgment? Or how do your decisions become trustworthy in the eyes of those impacted by them? They're not easy for a business school to teach. Courses and simulations can't substitute for the judgment and trustworthiness you develop when you're actually mentored by somebody. And as I noted earlier, switching jobs, switching locations and industry is very commonplace among young people, which makes long-term relationship much, much more difficult. At the end of the day, if we want to build a society that can thrive in a global, collaborative, trusting and changing environment, we need to build leaders that are more familiar with these issues, and that familiarity comes from long-term relationship building. Personally, I can credit most of my accomplishments and happiness today to the mentorship I've received over the years. In my second year as a student at university at Princeton, I was lucky enough to meet my most influential mentor by the name of E. Bronson Ingram. Ever since our first conversation over the dinner, Mr. Ingram shared his advice generously over the years and introduced me to the professional realms that I otherwise would never have seen. When choosing my first job, his guidance helped me steer to American Express because of the unique opportunity I would have to learn from great people with valuable leadership experience of their own. And later, while working for American Express in Singapore at the age of 30, he asked me to join his company. And although I recognize that a banker doesn't usually jump to an IT company, I did because I had faith in him, and he had faith in me. I was willing to take that risk. In other stages of my career, as I've navigated through different industries from finance to IT to distribution and now to publishing, the advice of my mentors and peers helped me develop both tangible and intangible skills necessary to make these transitions. And as someone who has benefited greatly from the personal mentorship, I've always felt the responsibility to pay that experience forward. That's why I made it part of my personal mission to mentor several hundred students and young professionals worldwide. From these interactions, there are two key pieces of advice that I would like to offer current and future mentors. Mentoring should not be a top-down relationship, but it needs to be a two-way dialogue to be effective. And two, mentoring cannot be haphazard or sporadic. It needs to be followed up on a frequent and most systematically multiplied through introductions to other mentors and mentees. It's not just a one-on-one only. To return to the story of Admiral Lee Sunshin and Yoo Sung-young in his later years, Yoo Sung-young wrote Jingbirok, a book of corrections that chronicled the Imjin War and voicing his opinions on Korea's military and government. In his well-respected account, many of the book's 62 vignettes highlight Lee Sunshin's military accomplishments and patriotic leadership. For me, this story illustrates that it's difficult to know just how much people can accomplish unless they're given the right opportunity and guidance over time. So as you exit this room today, I ask you, take 5 people and please mentor them. It is your mission and your responsibility to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, YS. I am impressed with your emphasis on mentoring relationship, which is the key to success. We are all looking for ways to success today, and YSG seems mentoring relationship as the key for that route. Any quick comments you gentlemen have, or lady? Okay.
Well, I think, it's really very, very true. And when we talk about it on a company perspective, I think we also have to see that mentoring has to be followed by sponsoring of those great people and great talent that we have in the company to really make it happen and to really make people successful. I think the combination of both is at most important.
Personally, I think it also depends on luck too, to a certain extent. But young YS was certainly very, very lucky to have that professor. I forgot to mention that YSG got his BA from Princeton, as he mentioned, cum laude in economics, and he had his MBA from Columbia University. Okay, next. Okay.
Just on your point on luck,
Yeah.
I think something Jim said, which we chatted about earlier, Napoleon used to say he expected his generals to be lucky. And what he meant by that was they put themselves in the right place at the right time.
Right.
I think that's about mentorship too. You have to be willing and ready to be mentored.
Right.
And the point that Jim made this morning about being mentorable makes the difference. Many people are not. They don't reach out. They stay very close to themselves. I think it's a very important part of you make your own luck in some ways in terms of mentorship.
But I might mention that there was a new book, recent bestseller in Korea, which is says entitled "You Earn Your Luck. Luck doesn't come by itself." So it also depends on your efforts too. Okay, so much for YS, and please, if you have any questions, prepare the note. And now, Janina Kugel from Siemens. I don't think I would need any introduction for the company, but just for information, if I may, Siemens is a world-renowned company, one of the highly respected companies in the world, with about 76 billion euros in sales, and with about 360,000 employees around the globe. It covers pretty much all the areas of industries, and Janina is responsible for the entire 360,000 people's happiness, so to speak. She's in charge of, she's a senior vice president of human resources at Siemens. She was born and raised in Germany, and she got her BA from University this is hard to read, but studied di Vienna in Italy, and also masters in economics and marketing organization design from University of Mainz, Germany. Let's give her a big applause for her speech.
So thank you for having me here in Seoul in this great period of time. I actually have to say that. And when we were preparing for the session, we were really talking about what should we talk about, what is the emphasis on that? And as YC was talking about like mentorship, let me really talk about what does leadership mean for people, and what does it mean to have great leaders in company? So what you have heard, Siemens is a multinational company, more than 360,000 people all over the world. And what is very important for me is that what counts for us in one country does not mean that we can actually apply the same thing in another company. And this is, I think, the challenge that we have when we look at really global leadership. That it's not anymore about being a German-based company operating internationally around the world, or being an American-based company and operating all around the world. It is really about reflecting the diversity that the world has, reflecting the different dynamics and the different cultures in the markets that we are having, and that really means true global leadership. And that is, I think, a challenge that we are all facing. So when you look really about what leadership is, there's a lot of leaders out there that are very pushy. They push their people, they are very eager. And they just like, they scream and they fire and they do all of those things. And maybe they actually also are successful quite some time. But I do not believe that this is sustainable leadership. Sustainable leadership means that you are absolutely the one who can actually motivate a team, who can actually manage that team also through different periods of time, through crisis, through growth, through difficult challenges, through blocking points, and really also not managing by pushing and pressuring, but by pulling and desiring people. And that means, again, in a global international environment, that you have to understand the challenges all over the company. So for example, yesterday in Siemens here in Korea, the challenges that we discussed are different ones than the challenges that we discussed last week in the US. And this is where you need to know as a leader, what is driving your people? How can you motivate your people? And what makes them really stand in there for you to say, this is my team, this is my company, and this is actually where I want to work for. And I think if you manage that, then you're coming a little closer. So talking about leadership, and that's one of the things that we are discussing recently very often in Siemens is, what is our culture? What is the company culture? And is the culture that we are having that made us successful for the past 160 years, is that still the culture that we have and that is good enough to also be successful in the future? And again here, I think if you're really reflecting yourself as a leader, but also yourself as a company, this is what you need to ask yourself. And we said, we want to call it the ownership culture. If our employees act as if Siemens were their own company, no matter who they are, no matter whether it's board level, top management, or no matter whether it's a technician, then I think we're coming to that a little closer. So we asked our people, what does leadership mean for you? And maybe you want to ask that yourself as well. What does leadership mean for you as well? So this is what our people responded. And interestingly enough, we did that, and we were talking about people in the senior management positions, and we were asking people all around the globe. And interestingly enough, we got the same results. It's about responsibility. It's about trust. It's about commitment, but it's also about being accountable for whatever you're doing. And that is one of the things that I usually say to all of the people. Every one of us who is working in a company has a responsibility and has an accountability for whatever we are doing. as a company that goes beyond what every individual can actually contribute. And we were talking this morning, and this is also the motto of this conference here, about education. I strongly believe that we have to rethink what education means to the world. And Dr. Kim this morning said that, for example, in Germany, from those people that are graduating out of high school, not everyone goes to pursue an academic career at university. But Germany has a history for what we call the vocational training, where people learn to become mechanics, electronicians, mechatronics. They really have a strong focus on handicraft. What we also do is we are building up people in a so-called dual career, so they go to university, and at the same time, they also work for us. After 3 or 4 years, they have their bachelor's, their master's, but they also have some working experience. And I strongly believe it has to go in parallel. In Siemens, only in Germany, we have more than 7,000 young people that are in that program, what we call Siemens Professional Education. We are really proud and we are really honored that, for example, President Obama is really looking and working very much with his government on that together, because he has recognized that the unemployment rate in the US can actually be leveraged if he has technical workers that have an education. And I think this is also the challenge that we see all over the world. So it's really rethinking. It's not only academic education that will make us successful in the world, but it really has to be several-folded. So let me talk about ownership culture. What does that mean for us? I mean, I don't have to say that. I think very, very important, and pretty much like the base and the pillar for everything is the values that every company has. And that is what you really have to understand, and this is really the values that you have to live at. And also very important for me is that the values of Siemens and the rules that we have in Siemens sometimes are even stronger than what we actually have in some of the countries. Diversity is just like one of the criteria to mention, and it is very local, and everyone here in the room knows what I'm talking about. But for us, it does really not matter where you're coming from, what's your ethnic background, what's your experiences. And that counts for everyone around the globe, even in countries where, for example, the sexual orientation is not so liberal. But still, for us, we set the standard. What is our corporate value? Equity. We strongly believe that employees that are shareholders of our company are really managing our company in the right way with a long-term perspective. And I don't want to complain anyone about the finance areas, but it's not a short-term interest of making Siemens grow and a sustainable company. So that is really why we are focusing with a lot of different shareholder programs also for our employees to become really owners of Siemens and own a share of them. Leadership, behaviors, and people orientation, and I bring them all together, is what is really changing and what's really influencing what we're doing as leaders. Ask yourself, when you're managing people, and as soon as you're managing 1 or 2 people in your group, how much time do you actually spend on the people that you're having? And how much time do you spend on the business challenges, on the numbers, on the day-to-day operations? And I think if we really reflect ourselves, and if we look into the mirror every day, and that's what I usually say to my peers, then I think we still have something to do. Focusing on your people, asking them, what is it that they need? And talking about behavior, talking about how do we set the tone in the team? How do we listen to each other? How do we allow innovative ideas? If someone approaches me with an issue, with a challenge, and says, listen, Janina, we have a problem here. And I, as a manager, respond, I don't want to hear anything about problems, just come up with solutions. Do you really believe that person will come again? No. But if someone approaches you and says, I have an issue, you have to think about how much this person has already thought about till they actually reach you as a manager. And this is really about applying the right behavior in that moment, listening, finding a solution together. And that can really change the context, and that can really change the tone. So it is really about moments that matter for us, and we all have different moments, and how do we actually make a move to that, and how do we interact, and how do we change the lens of the perspectives? And that is behavior. And I think when you think about a lot of those moments that you have every day, this is how you can actually change and manage a company. So we are focusing, and let's call it like 3 behaviors. Be honest, be courageous, and be respectful. If I'm talking about being honest, that means I'm honest about my business. I'm honest about whether I can bring home that project that I'm bidding there. I'm honest about the performance of myself and of my team. I'm honestly in giving feedback to people. And we all know, and there might be very different cultures, but even in those cultures, now being here in Korea, where you might think that giving feedback is something very normal, it's not. We, as people, don't like to hear the things that we're not good in doing that, right? We always want to hear how brave we were and how great we were and all of that. But when you're really reflecting about what is really bringing you forward and what is helping you, that it is about the things to know what the perception is about other people and what you could actually change and actually improve. So this is really something that we want to focus on in the company. Be courageous. Speak out the one thing that no one before has ever dared to say. Think about companies and think about politics and think about human being. How often they do not speak up what they're thinking. How often they do not share their opinion. And how often in company cultures, speaking out and saying what you're seeing is not appreciated. But we have to really change the company culture also in the way that you can be courageous. You can say things that no one has said before. You can break into new grounds of like managing different business that we have never managed before. But in order to do that, in order to be innovative, you also have to be courageous. And you can also be courageous in a team. It's not always about one single person. And last but not least, be respectful. If we talk to each other, if we appreciate the differences in the experiences, and if we treat each other with respect, I think we can manage most of the hurdles. And I said that yesterday when I was meeting with the HR people here in Korea. We have been changing quite a lot in the organization. And it does not yet work as we have been written it on paper. Of course not after 1 month that we're in place with that. But if we talk to each other, if we try to understand why we're making certain decisions, I really believe that this is something that is very, very important everywhere, no matter which culture or which country. So if you really listen to everything that we just like shared, it's really on the how we are managing our company. It's not about the experience that we have in the business and the functional and the technical skills we all have. What I always call the what, right? But it is really on how we manage the people, and it is also about the why. Why are we changing certain things? Why do we have to go into new areas? And explaining that to our people. And then I also believe that they will follow us. What we're doing there, and this is my last comment, traditionally when you talk about change, people always like say, you have to set the tone from the top. And that's correct, and that's definitely clear. Our president and chairman, Joe Kazer, has been setting the tone for ownership culture. And he said, this is really what is important for us. But what I experience is that if you're trying to put a change in place coming by the top, and I'm always like saying the French Revolution did not start from the king. It started from the people that were there in the population. And this is how you can drive change. Everyone working for Siemens can influence the culture of Siemens, and they can do their own thing. And only because maybe you are not treated by respect, that does not mean that you don't have to treat people with respect. We are all responsible for ourselves, and we can also, and all of us, deliver the change of what we want to do. And this is why we go with a viral change management approach, where we really say, this is what is important for us, and all of us can make a contribution, no matter whether you're a blue-collar worker in one of our factories or whether you're a top manager. changing your behavior, treating people with respect, and talking about the changes that are necessary to make us even more successful is what we understand under ownership culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Janina. I was impressed with the secret of Siemens, the way you put it. The secret Siemens didn't become great because of its a lot of, the technical supremacy or things like that, but more rather on the culture, which really gave rise to the particular set of leadership that is very unique to Siemens.
And you know what our secret is? It's our people.
Right. And the fact that you really seem to put a lot of emphasis on how to manage people, how to lead people to really make the company great. And this ownership culture, I think, is something very, very important, but it's also very hard to achieve. And for I think every company strives to have that, but not all companies succeed in that, it seems like. Any comments from any gentlemen? Okay. Next speaker will be Kevin from McKinsey. Kevin Sneader. Yeah. Okay. Let's give him a big applause.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I do want to take the perspective of a leader in the form of the chief executive, but I then want to broaden from that and talk about leadership more generally. But I do think it's important to understand what's on the mind of the leaders of major organizations around the world, what that therefore means for how leadership is changing, and in particular what it means for how CEOs, but frankly how all leaders spend their time, because I think that is also changing. So those are the topics I would like to share in this short presentation. And in doing so, I will echo the comments that Janina and YS have made about the context in which leadership needs to be discussed, because clearly that context continues to evolve. And it evolves because the assumptions, the basis on which people made decisions in the past, in many cases, no longer hold true. So for example, we all made assumptions around the cost of capital, that capital costs were actually going down. Well, that may change. We're currently at an unprecedentedly low point, but it looks like capital costs at some point are going to start to move. What happens then? We've made assumptions about inflation and the level of inflation. That is set and perhaps going to change. A lot of the assumptions we made are going to be different from those that they were in the past. We went through a long period of stability, and now we've seen increased volatility. One big thing that's changed is, of course, what is happening here in Asia. Asia today is already about 40% of the world's exports. It's reestablished itself as the engine for growth in the world. So the good news is all of us are broadly in the right place at the right time. How that evolves will affect the world's future, but also raises lots of questions about leadership, which many believe has been grounded in principles from places outside Asia. We've made assumptions about the cost of labor. In Asia in particular, labor has been relatively cheap. Well, it's getting a lot more expensive as populations age, and that is certainly true in Korea, but it's also true in China. The working population in China declined this year for the first time. And by 2050, there will be 25% less people in the working population in China than there are today. That means labor becomes scarce, and as it becomes scarce, cost goes up, which puts a huge pressure on productivity. So many of the assumptions that we've lived with will be different in the future. I think that gives rise to at least 7 things which are on the minds of CEOs, or things at least we can talk about this morning. And I think they are also, in terms of the title of success, the kind of skills that are needed in order to be a successful business leader in the environment I've just described. Let me start with resilience. It's not easy. It's very difficult leading in this time. And just one fact to bring that home, companies used to exist, and I chose the S&P 500, but we could have used other indexes around the world to make the same point. In 1935, companies on the major indices in the United States had been there for about 90 years. In 1975, for about 30 years. In 2011, 18 years. In 2014, 15 years. Companies are disappearing at a faster rate than ever before. At the same time, the tenures of their leaders are getting shorter. In a relatively short period, from 1995 to 2013, CEOs remained in position only for 7 years, whereas they used to remain in position for 10. And that number continues to shorten. So resilience is an important factor. And to be resilient, we argue, you need to be able to use a telescope and a microscope at the same time. Let me explain what I mean by that. Leaders today need a telescope. They need to be able to see the big picture, to look ahead, to have a vision. But at the same time, they need to understand what's happening deep in the organization, deep in their world, to spot the opportunity, to see how they can make a difference. But there's a problem. If you put a telescope in one eye and a microscope in the other, you get a headache. Headaches are not good for leadership, but that's what leadership nowadays requires, a telescope and a microscope. It also requires making bold decisions. I'm not saying that it used to be the case that small decisions made a difference, but what we have seen now is that it's big decisions, choices around where you place your bets that matter. This analysis looked at a large sample of companies, and we simply set out to understand what happened with companies that made less than 20% or changed less than 20% of their capital allocations. And they were the low reallocators, and they enjoyed a return of about 6%. Medium reallocators, i.e. who moved somewhere between 20 and 40% of their capital, 8%. Those who really moved a lot of capital, 10%. The world in which we live requires bigger and bolder decisions than that which were the case in the past. And the return goes to those who make those decisions and get them right. But as leaders, one of the challenges we have is to spot the difference between rockets and fireworks. Rockets go into the air and most of the time stay up. The problem with fireworks is they go up with a bright burst and then they come back to Earth rather quickly. So a challenge is, how do you spot the rocket versus the firework? Now, there are a few rockets on which we can rely. For example, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time in technology because I think Eli will do that in a moment, but the world in which we live now, with the digital changes that are taking place, I think was well characterized when someone said, digital is to this century what electricity was to the last century. It is going to wire and power a lot of the changes that we're all going to experience. That is a rocket. At the same time, let me just present a long list of things we all get excited about in the last few years. We all get excited about Brazil, Russia, India, and China, the BRICS. Only one of those actually merited the excitement in the first place when you actually look at what happened and how much growth was delivered, and it begins with a C. We've had a lot of talk about offshoring. Well, in reality, we're now seeing people bring jobs back to the places from which they departed, as the places to which the jobs were offshored got more and more expensive and the economic advantage of different labor rates diminished. We've heard a lot of talk about the Web 2.0. Well, we don't seem to hear much talk about that now. We now talk about digital and all the social media and things that are going on around it. Microfinance, which is a wonderful idea, is a tiny part of the financing that goes on in the world today. Telecommuting, the notion that people would all work from home. Some do, most don't. How do you distinguish between a rocket and a firework is one of the key challenges facing leaders today. Leaders also need to understand and lead when it comes to innovation. Innovation does change the rules of the game. And it's interesting to just compare two places where a lot of innovation occurred and simply contrast one how it was versus one how it is. If you take the companies that led in Detroit in 1990 and look at how they're doing today, whether it's Chrysler, GM, or Ford, and you add up their revenues today, they have about $250 billion of revenue today. Their combined market capitalization is $36 billion US. Facebook, Google, and Apple revenues less than those of the Detroit entities, 210 billion, but they have a market capitalization of about 22 times that of the Detroit entities. But they employ about 8% of the labor that Detroit employs. Therein is a challenge. It's a challenge for the world, but it's also a challenge for leaders to understand the impact of innovation. We also live in a world where government is a critically important part of the business economy. That's been true in Korea for a while, but it's much more true in the rest of the world than it has been for a long time. When we survey CEOs, they now say up to 60% of their earnings hinge on government decisions, regulatory decisions. Will we allow insurance of a vehicle? Will we allow building permission for a new plant? But only 20% of CEOs believe they're any good at influencing those decisions in the first place. So a whole new set of skills are needed by leaders to understand the work environment and the role of government in that environment. Leaders also now face our burden of making sure, and this should be a joy, not a burden, that they grow, and I'm tempted to change manage to mentor, they grow, mentor, and attract colleagues who are able to take leadership on for the next generation, so that everyone is able to be a true leader, not just the CEO and not just those who report to a CEO. Those days have long gone. And these are just some of the institutions that we've been studying to look at the way in which they build leadership and ensure leaders are able to attract, mentor, and develop new talent to fill the leadership of their companies. And that matters because it used to be that there were anecdotes around good leaders make better decisions and companies with good leadership tend to do better than other companies. Well, I think those aren't anecdotes anymore. We can certainly point to facts. We looked at companies, looked at their assessment of leadership, worked with some outside agencies and decided and came up with a statistic that we believe companies that are good at people management deliver returns somewhere in the order of 22% to their shareholders. Companies that are not good barely deliver a return at all. So the value of good leadership is economic. It's not just imaginary. I did want to touch on one other aspect, which I think is vitally important for leaders today. They need to embrace the full range of leadership, not just the half of the population that has traditionally populated the leadership ranks. And this is a direct challenge to Asia in particular, which is just not good at ensuring women fill the leadership ranks in equal measure to men. Actually, Asia's pretty bad. I won't single out any country, but you can see the flags at the bottom of the chart here. And I look around the room, and the good news is it's a bit more than 2%, but it's certainly not 20% or even 50% in this room. It's vitally important that that gets solved as an issue, because leadership cannot hinge on what is actually the minority of people in the world today, the male 49% of the population. So these are just some of the things that leadership, I think, entails when you think about what's on the mind of a chief executive as they look at all the tasks they face. But what does it really mean in terms of the type of individual that leads? Now, I could say everyone's a leader, but let me just highlight why I think it's a very complicated challenge now, leading in the world we just discussed. First of all, this notion of telescope and microscope, being able to look for a vision, but at the same time see what's happening in great detail. That is not easy. Second, being ready for trend breaks, being ready to challenge the conventional wisdom, the assumptions on which you previously made decisions. Because if you don't do that and you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. I wonder what that is in Korean. But anyway, you'll never be able to break the habits of the past. A tri-sector athlete, what do we mean by that? We mean someone who can work comfortably in the private sector, work comfortably with government, and work comfortably with the social sector, the non-profit institutions, because the role between society and business is now one that has to be particularly close. No longer is it the case that business can ignore what happens in the world around it. And a receptor and a connector, the notion here is leaders have to be able to connect people, to figure out how to be part of networks, to join people together and help ideas flow. That's the nature of the role. What does that mean for the person? Well, people who succeed do need a strong sense of purpose. They do have to have something to which they are building. They need to be able to stay calm because the environment is going to be difficult, just as it was for the Admiral. I can't wait to see the movie. Always on. It's not easy to take a break. Perhaps it should be easier, but the reality is leaders are now always on. You no longer are one moment in leadership mode and the next moment you're not. There is a need to be able to lead in a way that is constant. And to do all that whilst recognizing that leadership isn't about winning a race today, it's about a marathon. It's about doing this for the long run. Those attributes and the nature of the role are difficult. They also give rise to a question on the choices people make and the way they spend their time. The blue bars here, if you can catch them, are about what people want to spend their time on as leaders, as CEOs. They want to spend time on people issues. They want to spend time on direction and strategy. They want to spend time engaging with the outside world. All of those are critically important, and they are the things that CEOs and every business leader wants to do. But there is a problem. It's the things in yellow that we end up spending the majority of our time on. Risk management, an issue that arises. Performance reviews, operating decisions. That's what actually takes up the majority of a leader's time. Reconciling those two forces, what you want to do versus what you end up doing, that is the challenge of leadership. And in case we all think it's only a superhuman that can do all of this, and start to think, what's the point? It's all too difficult. I was very struck by a comment that a former CEO made at a meeting I was attending when he said the following. He said, if the burden of leadership in the modern age can seem overwhelming, the good news is that the potential benefits are overwhelming too. The flip side of the chaos, the complexity, and the pressure is that large organizations, if led well, can do more for more people than at any other moment in human history. Leaders who understand that role and how to leverage it in this rapidly changing concept have opportunity to change the world in ways their predecessors never imagined. That's the prize of all that complexity, the prize of all the challenges that leaders now face, and the prize of good mentorship, inspiring others, and focusing on the things that matter, is that more change now is possible than ever before. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm impressed by the way you gave your prescription for success, which is that the manner in which the leaders should spend their time is something that you seem to put a very concrete the prescription to all of us. And this manner of spending time really came from the various factors that leaders, especially CEOs, take into consideration in making their decisions and the attributes they should have as leaders. So this would have, I think, a great implications for especially CEOs of companies. I appreciate that. For your information, Kevin Sneader went to University of Glasgow in law, and he went to Harvard Business School with MBA. For MBA, he graduated with the highest distinction, and which led to him to McKinsey, and he is heading up the entire McKinsey operation in Asia currently. Yeah. Any comments or big comments? Okay, the last speaker would be Eli Collins, who is a very interesting professional in what he does. Let me tell you a bit about his company. The Cloudera is a very unique company based in Palo Alto, California. It was founded in 2008, only about 6 years ago, and it is, I don't know what really this means exactly, but the company provides Apache Hadoop-based services, but this company was founded by data experts, leading data experts from all of the companies, big famous companies that you know, Facebook, Google, Oracle, Yahoo. And these experts on data got together and founded a company. And this company received funding of $1.2 billion in the last 6 years, which is, as a new venture company, receiving this kind of funding shows how much of a respect or expectation this company is attracting from all over the world. Intel is recently invested a heavy sum into this company. So this is a data company, software company that reinforces the uses of data and the new techniques in IT area by the general, the consumers and the companies. And what he says, I think he will say about the secret of to success that he sees is particularly useful, which is data. And we are very much interested in data. Big data is a very popular word these days. So let's give him a big hand to Eli Collins. He had is a BA from New York University in the computer science, and then his master's in University of Wisconsin in computer science. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. I really appreciate you guys taking time out of your schedule to speak with us, and I'm daunted by going after 3 excellent presentations and being before lunch. So hopefully I'll respect that position. I'm going to talk today about using data to solve some of our biggest collective challenges and how, as leaders, you can be more effective in doing that. And the idea of using data to solve problems is as old as using computers. And so what I'm going to talk today about is really a tipping point that we had that started about 10 years ago. And that results in an impact that is relevant to leaders today in a way that wasn't previously. So to the extent that people were able to ignore data, they're no longer able to do so today. And about 10 years ago, a number of internet companies bumped into some problems managing data and that were unprecedented. And they had to invent a lot of new technology to address these problems. And they did so, and 10 years later, if you look at today, so many of our activities, whether it's finding fraud in financial systems or growing food or buying products or training humans, involves activities that generate data and can therefore benefit from the analysis of that data. So getting value from data is becoming a necessary competency in order to be effective, even outside the technology industry. And so in my world, data has completely revolutionized our area. Actually, the previous presentation that showed the market capitalization of the technology industry and software in Silicon Valley relative to the automotive industry in Detroit is a good example of that. But the reason this is important to this audience is that the revolution is coming to all industries. And I think there's 2 big changes that are leading to that. One is there's a universal desire to be data-driven. And I think people have always had this. Good leaders have always wanted to know what are the studies, what are the facts. This is why McKinsey does so much of the work they do, is they really want to understand what's going on and how to make smarter decisions based on that knowledge, and then how to measure the impact of those decisions. And so we've wanted to be data-driven for a long time. And in fact, now one of the sexiest jobs in the United States is called a data scientist. It's someone who uses the scientific method to improve business. And now, because that desire, we also have tools that enable it. So it used to be that analytics and getting value from data was a very top-down exercise, where the data came from all parts of the business and was funneled to successively smaller and smaller populations until it got to the top decision makers who used the result of that analysis and funneled it down through the organization. But now data is getting much more democratized. So the capabilities of collecting and understanding and processing data are getting available to many employees. So a regular employee at Google can perform an experiment and collect data and use insights from that to make a decision. You don't just have to be an executive to do that. And so that's important, though, for leaders to know. And the reason is that there's so much opportunity to use data for good. We get more information about our companies, our lives, ourselves every year. We increasingly get many new capabilities to handle, visualize, process that data than we ever had before. And the result is that data is becoming accessible. And we don't just want to continue using data the way we have previously. We want to expand the set of things that we can do with data. We want to use data for good. And we have to figure out privacy and ethical handling of data and many of the issues that are not new, because they're important for their own reason, but in my opinion, more importantly, they're the issues that we have to figure out to use data for good, and there's so much opportunity for that. And I want to talk about 3 areas where we have been using data for good to give you a bit of insight into what some leaders are doing with data. And the first example comes from healthcare. The Michael J. Fox Foundation is an organization in the United States that's targeted Parkinson's disease. And they've been partnering with Intel, and they're trying to better understand the progression of Parkinson's. And the challenge with Parkinson's disease has been that the symptoms of it are highly variable. So if you only go to the doctor infrequently and you only see the doctor for small periods of time, then we don't really have a very good look at what the progression of Parkinson's disease looks like. We don't really have a good way to evaluate whether specific treatments are working. And so one of the things that data is allowing us to do via wearables is that we can collect data on the measurable attributes of Parkinson's, tremors, slowness of movement, or sleep quality. And we can do that with a large population of patients, and we can do it 24/7. So we can get a much better picture of what the onset and development and progression of Parkinson's looks like, and use that data to evaluate treatments and potentially come up with a cure. So healthcare has had a real gap in terms of its ability not to understand Parkinson's or to ask questions about it, but they've had a gap in terms of getting the data that they needed to understand the disease and hopefully make progress on it. Data is starting to revolutionize the energy industry as well as climate. So we're deploying sensors from our oceans to our roads, our buildings, the atmosphere, and finally outer space. And all of this data is giving us high fidelity information about our environment. And this is precisely what we need to tackle hard problems like how we'll adapt to climate change. And if we can get information about our energy consumption and production, that full life cycle from the time we produce energy all the way through to how we consume it, we can use that information to better understand the impact of our choices. For example, how much energy was used to create this product, and how clean was that energy, and who produced it, and how could we make that same product more efficiently. Those are all things today that we can do today if we look at the data. So there's a company in the US that's a good example called O-Power, and they look at billions of meter readings every minute, and they use that to improve the efficiency of our energy grids, and they use that, more importantly, to change the behaviors of people so that they innately start to conserve more energy. Data is one of the things that our education systems, I think globally, but definitely in the United States, struggle with. So schools generate lots of data, and there's no way to uniformly store, process it, or access it. We have data on everything from attendance to obviously scores, what children eat, where they live, but we're very poor at using that data to actually improve education. And there's been attempts to do that. There's a company in the United States called InBloom, and they were using school data to look at student progress and try to help teachers, provide a resource for teachers to help students. And so there's a lot of opportunity to use the data about students and teachers to improve our education system. And the challenge has been that while we have great ambitions for using data, they still don't nearly match the reality. Our reality is far behind our ambitions. And the reason for that is that we're still in the very early days of this mission. There's still very few people who are aware of it. And it's also quite a different change in behavior. Historically, we haven't always been data-driven. And collectively, as a technique, using data is getting a lot of scrutiny. And it rightly so, right? Analytics used to be about large corporations looking at their transactions, and now we're talking about looking at the data of all of our interactions. And so the technology has really raised the stakes, and it's up to us to try to figure out how to respond in kind. And we're going to respond through trust. And it's funny that this is a talk in some ways about technology, but really the most important missing piece is not technology, it's trust. And the first way we'll establish trust is by establishing transparency. So how data is used, how it's collected, how we derive value from it. All of that information, all of that process has to be public to evaluate acceptability. Because not every group of people, company, organization, country, society, or age group even, has the same expectations or the same tolerance level for how their data is used. And transparency is how we'll manage this diversity of requirements, but still provide value through data. The second is by establishing best practices. And this is for those of you who most likely haven't seen this, it's a United States tax form. And it's an example of when we establish best practices and we codify the practices of how we apply and use data and what we use it for, it can be adopted through our companies and our societies much faster. So if we continue to develop ad hoc policies for every time we want to make a decision or every time we have to do a new activity, we won't really get the amplification effect. So we have to develop best practices for how we use data and how we derive value from it. And we have to define what abuse means. So if we don't have transparency and we don't have best practices, or if we have transparency, we have best practices, part of that is that we have to define what behavior is not acceptable and figure out how to implement that. So we have to have auditing, we have to have legally enforceable penalties, and we have to have visibility into how people are deriving value from data. And those of us who are data rich, we worry a lot about privacy, but data deserts can be just as harmful. So today, when we use data to build models that improve financial services or the environment or the products we choose, that has to be available to all consumers, not just those that we take the data from. And finally, we have to establish trust through oversight. So every part of this process has to be observable so that we can trust it. And as I mentioned, we need legally enforceable penalties for systems that don't. Otherwise, we won't trust the system and we won't contribute the data. And so all of the challenges here are getting escalated because as we consume data and analytics, increasingly in the products we choose or the cloud services we use, that big data is getting embedded into the services. You might not even be aware that you're consuming it. So we have to figure out how to have oversight of how we use data to make sure we are in fact doing good. And finally, the last point, and I believe this is maybe one of the most important ones, particularly at this venue, is that this has to be a global effort. So globalization has dissolved many of the traditional boundaries. So people, companies, products, services, and therefore our data necessarily spans the globe. So we have to attack this problem and figure out how to use data globally. So we need to align on best practices, not just as individual companies or groups, but we need to do that across sectors and geography and countries so that data can flow across boundaries. And the big promise of the internet and now data is that we'll be able to use data from the whole world to get a better picture of what that looks like. And that insight's what's going to power economic and social growth. And in order to do that, data will have to flow across borders. And if we do this right, we'll even take down some of those borders, and we'll start to use data for good. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. I'm very impressed by the fact that this forum has data, and set the data, the topic of data as a main theme of this HR forum and the leadership or success issue. It is certainly one of the emerging new topic of great importance for all of us to be really need to be very interested in and work on. And I hope next year's session will have, with the help of Eli, gentlemen like Eli, will have a much greater time allocated to this particular subject, because I really think the one who has mastery in this particular area will have a definite advantage over their competitors. And I really appreciate your very insightful opening up of that issue to all of us. So we have covered four speakers, wonderful speakers, who basically handed down a particular secret or approach to success, which all this HR forum is aiming at. And Chairman G laid out the mentoring relationship as the key element of success and the leadership. And then many laid out as an example, citing the example of Siemens. They laid out the issue of leadership, which is coming from a particular cultural setting, which is ownership culture, and as the key element of the success. And Kevin laid out the way the CEOs, leaders behave, spend their time, allocate their time, which is in line with the changes that this world has brought about, especially the 7 new elements, phenomena that this world is witnessing, and how the leaders' time spending has to change in accordance with that changes. And finally, Eli Collins has given us the importance, reminded us very effectively the importance of data to bring about the success in our future. Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. And we have about 16 questions given out from the audience, which is a very, very good sign that you have all shown this kind of interest. But we are only given about 10 minutes to cover all these questions. So unfortunately, I will have to exercise my discretion in picking up which of these questions can be really handled. And it's very hard to read some of these handwritings. So I hope you can understand. I should have brought my eyeglasses. But let's go from the very easy one, which is directed to Chairman G, which, as I recall, was very quick. It was. I'm sorry. Okay, let me. There are a lot of questions regarding mentoring.
Good.
It says, I mean, a bit surprising, but I think it shows the interest that people have. Okay. Basically, the question is, sometimes the mentors, not all mentors are good to the mentees, may not be good. And some of them may not be suitable for them. So is there any criteria in judging the good from bad, if you have?
You know, mentoring is such an individual thing that I'm not sure we want to prescribe a formula to mentoring. But I think there are some key elements that have to be present. First of all, as Kim mentioned today and Kevin reiterated, you need to make yourself mentorable first. You have to put in your effort to become mentorable, and then you need to find somebody who has the same energy back to you. And you know, we have a very famous saying here in this country, right? It takes two hands to make a sound of a clap. So mentoring is about two hands making the clap. You have to make the effort, and the other side has to make the effort. I think if you do make the effort, there is no such thing as bad mentor. And the other myth that I like to walk away from is that somehow one can have one mentor in one's life. No, that's not the case. I mean, we heard Jim talk about how many different mentors he has had along his career. I've had many, many, many. So I think we just cannot be looking for some magical answer that solves all of our problem for our whole life. You know, just an open attitude.
Okay. I hope you got the right answer. Okay, this is for Kevin. You said that the leader have to interact with the government and society. But then what do you think about the what do you call CSR, corporate social responsibility? Leaders should consider about this, and if so, how seriously? Yeah.
I think they need to think about it very seriously. There used to be a saying that had a lot of currency. The business of business is business. That's just not true anymore. That saying implied that if business just kept its head down, made economic profit, life would be good. Well, it doesn't work that way. Business operates in a context. The context is society. Society has a set of interests around the way in which we collaborate with each other, income equality or inequality, gender neutrality, and so on and so forth. And the impact that the business world has on, for example, the environment is profound. Pollution is a major issue here in Asia. It's a consequence of economic development. The notion that business can somehow or other put its head down and just keep going, when all around it we have environmental challenges, business needs to be part of that solution. So if anything, the only concern I have with corporate social responsibility is it implies it's for a group of people off to the side to worry about. All business leaders need to embrace the notion that business operates in a context, that context is broader society, and we therefore have a responsibility to play a role in society that is a positive and active one, and not one that ultimately depends on others doing something and hoping it works out.
Okay, very good. For the sake of time, I'll just go to the next question. To Janina. Yeah. You mentioned something about the difference between leader and boss, I think. And it's really hard to find a real leader in Korea. And as such, it's also hard to find a good mentor. Yeah. In a country like Korea, which is so competitive as it is, what do you think is the right image or type of a leader here, or of a leader here in a country like Korea?
Oh, well, this is of course a very challenging question for me because Other than only coming here on business trips, I have never lived here. But I really believe that leadership is really about what, what Wisey and Kevin already said. It's about more than being a boss, right? It's about reflecting really what is happening in the society. And I think a great leadership also means that you know who you are as a person and that you have the right personality. So that means that you have to reflect of like, what can you do? What can't you do? And then it's also like by gaining, like through mentorship and through all of those things. So I strongly believe that you have great leaders as well in Korea, and there's great leaders everywhere in the world. The question is like, what is the personal definition of great leadership? And I believe that everything that we talked about in the last 2 hours is the challenge that we have to put there. And then there might be plenty of great leaders. And I think this is always what I say, there's a lot of what we call green flag behaviors. There is a few things that for me is the red flag behavior, and that's what I also mentioned, like for example, not treating people with respect. And if this occurs, then my definition would be that this person is not a great leader. But there's many ways of being a good leader.
Okay, for Eli, you mentioned, very clearly the importance and the role of data that it play in the future. How would you rank Korea as in terms of the degree of maturedness or development in using data in the worldwide scale?
So I actually have the luxury of having some Korean customers who give me a little bit of insight into how people are using data. And I think Korea is a leader in this example. I spent a lot of time at Samsung the other day and listening. I wish I could tell you a lot about what I heard, but unfortunately I can only give you a short synopsis. But people who have a leadership position in building products that generate data or consume data are very aware of this industry. As I said, it's 10 years is not old, but it's not new either. And so whether that's making a phone or making a car, the people who are working in the companies here that I've interacted with that are generating data are very thoughtful about how they should be using that data to improve things.
Yeah, another quick follow-up question. Could you elaborate a bit more about your company, which I've come to,
Sure.
here for the first time. Yeah.
Yeah, so Cloudera was founded 6 years ago. We're about 700 people, headquartered in California. And we help companies use all of their data to ask bigger questions. So as I mentioned in the talk, most companies have had kind of a lot of burning questions for a long time. They just haven't had the means to help, the technology means to answer them. And so we help companies provide the technology means to answer their questions.
Okay. Another question for Chairman Ji. Personal question. Could you be my mentor?
The answer is, of course, yes. But I need to know who that is.
I will see you shortly and ask again in person.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But as I said, it's a two-hand making a sound of a clap. You, whoever that was, has got to be ready to put in the time and the effort.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. There are a few more. Okay. So as I said, there are more questions about mentoring. So I will just put one more question on this. It looks like your mentoring relationship started accidentally. It looks like. If I start a mentoring program at my company, what would be the most important success factor, do you think, in my company context?
Well, I mean, I think all of them comes back to the same answer I gave a moment ago about being a two-way street. Whoever this person that asked the question, first of all, thank you for wanting to be a mentor and to create a program in your company. All of us here in our talks eventually talked about doing things to make a difference one step at a time. All of the things that they put up eventually says no change happens overnight. And you mentioned about luck as well. And so, one at a time, one person at a time, make a difference. You learn a lot by being a mentor yourself and reflect that in your next one, and so on and so forth. And it's like the leadership. None of us were born with a leadership DNA, I don't think. We learned along our different phases of our lives. So, please have a long-term view about mentoring. Don't do what Dr. Kim talked about yesterday in his lecture about, everything has to be somehow end result measurable and competitive. It is not about that. And just related to that, I'd like to make one more comment to all of you because you've taken the time to come here today and to listen. When you pose questions to Dr. Kim and to us today, I recognize a little trend, and that is that you really want a black and white answers on all of your questions. And that's a great trait that he talked about Koreans being competitive, wanting an end result, and being persistent and hard driving. But I ask you one more thing, because I did already ask you to be a mentor, but I have a second request now. Would you please adopt something that is really, really important to me and has really helped me a lot? And I learned this from golf, actually, because I'm a golf nut. It's 3 letters. P-M-A. P-M-A. Please walk away and try your best, as I do every day, to adopt the PMA mentality. That means positive mental attitude. To look at things not from a negative point of view, but from a positive point of view. And I bet you that those of us who are sitting here, we didn't get where we are because we're always negative. We got here because we're positive. We see opportunities. We know there are challenges. And gosh, I think that my count of failures is probably in the millions by now, if not billions. But that's not going to stop me or any of us here from going the next time. So PMA, that's all I ask.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, and everybody who has spared your time to come here. And we are about to finish this session. I'm sorry that we couldn't cover all the questions that you've raised, but I'm sure you can find from this the Korea Economic Daily the email address of these speakers. So please direct your questions, and we'll finish it as of now. Thank you very much. Yeah.